Greetings, California educators. On behalf of the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project and the California Department of Education, welcome to this online professional learning that will focus on answering this essential question. What the heck is universal design for learning? In short, it's a question of access and equity for all. To begin, I'll introduce myself and orient you to the structure of the following content. My name is Janelle Mercado. I am a Program Support Specialist for the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project. We are a project funded by the California Department of Education focused on providing tiered technical assistance to districts focused on improving outcomes for students with disabilities in general education settings. On behalf of our team, it is an honor to have the opportunity to present this framework, and I'd like to thank the CDE for the opportunity. For more information about the project and access to free resources, visit our website at www.sipinclusion.org or follow us on Twitter and Facebook at sipinclusion. The learning objectives for this session are intended to generally deepen understanding of the UDL framework in key terms, for the purpose of increasing access and outcomes for our most marginalized student populations. This presentation will be a general overview for participants to become familiar with the overarching tenets of UDL. More specifically, attendees will leave this session with an understanding of the connections between learner variability, intersectionality, and the cycle of failure, develop an awareness of the UDL framework and vocabulary, define the characteristics of an expert learner, recognize and address barriers in the planning and learning process. To accompany this presentation, you have a Padlet wall available to you, which is a bulletin board of resources that can be accessed to deepen your knowledge of universal design for learning. The Padlet wall can be accessed at the link on the slide. All of the resources referenced, along with the recording, PowerPoint, and processing guide, can be found on the Padlet. This Padlet also houses a 3-part webinar series on UDL that takes a deeper dive into the key concepts introduced in this session. Simply click the resources you would like to download, follow the prompts, and look for it in your download file. The processing guide is a space for you to take notes and respond to reflection prompts to enhance your learning experience. The icon of a piece of paper shown at the bottom right-hand corner of the slide will appear on each slide that has a corresponding space to jot down notes on your processing guide. You are also welcomed to utilize any other tools that will support your learning with or in place of the processing guide. We want you to have choices. This would be the perfect time to visit the Padlet, download the processing guide. You can complete it electronically or print it out and use it as a hard copy. Let's ground ourselves with an understanding of the differences between equality and equity, as they are often confused. Too often, our educational system views student experiences and outcomes from an equality perspective, and that everyone should receive and respond to the same stimulus in the same way. In the educational context, however, we know that our student population is extremely diverse. In an equality-focused educational system, all students are afforded the same opportunity to learn, progress, and be accepted. However, not every student approaches this educational system the same way, so therein lies the inequity of marginalization. In an equitable educational system, it is based on all students getting what they need, which will be different for each student, but the outcome means every student receives the opportunity to access and benefit from their education through multiple means of engagement, representation of information, and options to express their understanding of content taught. Notice that the processing guide icon is located on the bottom right of the screen. We have 2 questions. First, in what ways does an equality perspective create barriers to learning? Secondly, in what ways does an equity perspective value individual learning differences? Pause the recording and take a few moments to reflect and respond. To set the equity-focused context of UDL, I wanted to provide a few foundational statements and common misconceptions. First, UDL is not a curriculum or toolbox. It is a mindset for equity and access. UDL is a proactive lesson planning framework that identifies potential barriers to learning. UDL is not specific to students with disabilities, but it is for all learners. UDL is a universal Tier 1 level of support across all educational settings. Additional resources about UDL can be found at www.cas.org. You can access the interactive UDL guidelines, which are shown on the screen and will be referenced multiple times through this session at udlguidelines.cas.org. Throughout this presentation, I'll introduce key vocabulary. I'll introduce each key piece of vocabulary following the order on the slide. First, we'll review learner variability as it relates to intersectionality and identity development, principles, guidelines, checkpoints, expert learners, engagement, representation, action, and expression. Continue to refer back to this section of your processing guide as we dive deeper into the definitions. First, we'll focus on the specific UDL term of learner variability. Learner variability is governed by the various contexts and environments in which students are expected to learn, as well as their level of expertise, interests, and previous experience. The UDL definition of learner variability is this: experience and common sense suggest that all individuals are unique and learn in ways that are, to a varying degree, particular to them. And in the past quarter century, science has elucidated the great variability of human capacity to learn. Yet our educational system is designed around the idea that most people learn the same way, and that a fair education is an identical one. On your processing guide, reflect on the following questions. Which aspects of the quote above resonated with you? Would you agree or disagree that our educational systems are designed around a one-size-fits-all model? Illustrating the idea of learner variability, we can relate to physical variability in height, weight, reach, torso, shoulders, etc. In other words, we all have a jagged physical body composition profile. It makes me think of a Mini Cooper sports car. And what if it was manufactured as a one-size-fits-all car with no flexible accessibility features, such as an adjustable seat or movable steering column? Neither man on the screen would fit for a variety of physical limitations. To be clear, the accessible limitations are in the car design, not the individuals. The same is true for our students and their learning environments. Similar to the Mini Cooper example and physical variability, everyone comes to the school setting with differences in learning, memory, language, knowledge, reading, etc. However, there is a tendency to teach to a mythical average. Yet, research confirms there is no such thing as an average learning profile. It's an educational rainbow unicorn. Much like a jagged physical profile, individuals also have a jagged learning profile. So, when we teach to the mythical average, too many learners are relegated to the margins. Take a moment and think about your own jagged learning profile. Chart it on the space provided on your processing guide and compare it with a colleague, family member, or friend. A couple more points about learner variability. Two things we know for sure. Learner variability is systematic and to a large degree predictable. There has never been a class in the history of education of student performing at the same academic, behavioral, developmental, social, emotional level among all students. So, we can predict that there is going to be a jagged learning profile, and therefore we can plan for that. Additionally, learner capacities are context dependent. Context dependent meaning we are experts at some things and require supports in other areas. Some may learn better in the morning, others might be night owls. I'm not awesome at spelling, but math is my forte. Now let's take learner variability a bit deeper and understand it through the lens of intersectionality. It's a term critical to understanding the various identities that students bring to the educational system. To begin the conversation about learner variability through the lens of intersectionality, we have to self-reflect on the idea that there are specific groups of people that are afforded privileges in our society and educational system that are not accessible or afforded to other groups. This requires a level of adult self-reflection and also shared responsibility. We are all responsible for teaching all students beyond the silos of general education, special education, English learners, etc. All students are our students, and all students are general education students first. In your processing guide, we've referenced shared responsibility and self-reflection. What thoughts, emotions, and/or perspectives are raised based on the terms privilege, implicit bias, and marginalization? Take a moment and reflect. To further align the conversation about learner variability through the lens of intersectionality and the connection to equity in education, we need to ground ourselves with a shared definition of equitable education. Bitters defines equitable education as the educational policies, practices, and programs necessary to eliminate educational barriers based on gender, race, ethnicity, national origin, color, disability, age, or other protected groups of status, and provide equal educational opportunities and ensure that historically underserved or unrepresented populations meet the same rigorous standards for academic performance expected of all children and youth. On your processing guide, document your personal definition of an equitable education. When we acknowledge that bias exists, we are then empowered to go deeper into the work of breaking it down one baby step at a time. We can do this work by increasing our awareness of identity, which includes understanding of intersectionality. Conversations around privilege, power, and implicit bias begin with self-reflection of how our society works and that there are individuals, certain people, that benefit from the way the world is structured, and there are those who are marginalized because of these structures. Take a moment to watch a short video on intersectionality from Teaching Tolerance located on the Padlet. There is a space in your processing guide to express your thoughts while watching the video. To recognize our human approach to student identities, we must also examine our beliefs and expectations for our students. We can use the cycle of failure to reference. It is a far too common reality for students who learn outside the box. As a result of a student experiencing marginalization, a deficit view emerges, expectations lower and are perpetuated. Student is labeled and segregated, and the cycle continues beyond our pre-K to 12 system. This is evidenced in disproportionate representation of certain specific student populations in special education, discipline referrals, post-secondary outcomes, etc. In your processing guide, we've included a few questions around the cycle of failure. To review, now that we're clear knowing our students come to us with a wide variability of identities, strengths, and complex needs, a one-size-fits-all approach will increase systemic inequities and decrease student access to information and limit their outcomes. So how do we create environments that remove barriers and promote self-determination while developing self-advocacy skills? We can look to the Universal Design for Learning guidelines as a framework to honor learner variability and move students into becoming expert learners. As a reminder, your processing guide includes space to reflect on the meaning of each upcoming vocabulary term. To reiterate, UDL is not a special education thing. It is a Tier 1 multi-tiered system of support, universal, imperative for all students to benefit from their learning experience in the way they engage, process information, and provide multiple means of demonstrating their level of understanding. To continue building background, let's dive in. UDL is the proactive design of curriculum and instruction to ensure accessibility is afforded to all regardless of learning preference, physical or sensory abilities. Just as physical barriers exist in our environment, curricular barriers exist in our instructional environment. As an example, consider the connection between Universal Design for Learning and universally designed architecture. The way in which buildings, sidewalks, and technology have been designed for greater access can benefit all. Elevators and escalators provide greater access beyond stairs. Furthermore, curb cutouts designed for wheelchair use are beneficial to all: strollers, joggers, the elderly, etc. Closed captioning, meant to provide access to deaf and hard of hearing individuals, are accessed and used by all. Question: What if we proactively planned instructional access to students in the margins, but all students were able to utilize? UDL is a means of ensuring each student has a bridge to equitable educational experiences. UDL, researched and developed by the Center of Applied Technology, or CAST, is intended to guide the development of curricula that is flexible and supportive. Universally designed structures are indeed more usable by individuals with disabilities, but in addition, they offer unforeseen benefits for all. UDL is not a toolbox, it is a mindset for all learners. UDL is a proactive lesson planning framework that identifies potential barriers to learning. Currently, with the shift to distance and blended learning, we are seeing larger barriers than ever before. For more specific information, resources, and examples, please visit the Interactive UDL Guidelines webpage at www.udlguidelinescast.org. The UDL guidelines were created based on brain research that has provided educators with a plethora of information regarding the way in which the brain engages with information, makes sense of information, and determines pathways through which goals are achieved and demonstrated. The brain is an intricate system, and using the information about how it works, the UDL guidelines are structured around 3 principles, each one intended to activate different areas of the brain. The UDL provides students with multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression. Each column in the graphic is a principle. There are 9 guidelines, 3 in each principle, that are intended to activate different areas of the brain. The 9 guidelines are providing options for recruiting interest, providing options for perception, providing options for physical action, providing options for sustaining effort and persistent, language and symbols, expression and communication, self-reflection, comprehension, and executive functioning. The checkpoints provide educators with more detailed information and examples within each guideline. Each checkpoint indicates the ways we can remove barriers for students and create learning environments that are more accessible for everyone. The goal is that we use the UDL framework to develop students into expert learners that are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal-directed. You'll notice in the graphic that the creation of expert learners is the foundation of the UDL framework. At this point, let's make the framework actionable in the way they are read. Notice that there are tabs on the left. The first tab is the Access row. This is a guidance for educators to provide access by creating ways to recruit interest, perception, and physical action. The responsibility for these guidelines is external or teacher-focused. Next, across the Build row of the guidance, the focus is on assisting and partnering with students in building skills, similar to gradual release of responsibility. By providing students with ways to learn how to sustain effort and persistence, how to understand the language and the symbols, and how to explore with different ways to express and communicate what they know. Finally, students internalize those skills by understanding themselves as learners, how they learn best, and are able to determine ways in which they self-regulate, independently comprehend information, and the executive functioning skills across contexts to reach their goals. Note that this process ultimately puts students in control of their own learning. This does not happen overnight, and remember to start small. Choose a guideline or checkpoint to begin and grow from there. It takes many opportunities for practice and many opportunities for failure and redos. Maintaining a growth mindset, always reminding students that they haven't learned it yet. Celebrating failures and the growth progress and learning that occurs when you try something and don't get it right is a critical component of UDL. Students must be given permission to be courageous, try a thing, not get it right in the first attempt, and be encouraged to keep on going. We're striving for creating expert learners, that are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal-directed. Now let's do a little long-range vision setting. There's a space in your processing guide to choose an adjective and a reason why in this sentence stem. In my opinion, the #1 quality of a student who is college, career, and civic life ready is blank because blank. As an example, I chose self-advocacy as an adjective that describes a student who is college, career, and civic life ready because they know themselves, how they learn, and can ask for what they need to be successful. Which adjective did you choose and why? These are examples of an expert learner. In presenting this exercise live to hundreds of audiences, I've never received the answer of academically proficient, which is a result of being an expert learner, not the definition of. Review the bullet point description of an expert learner on the slide within each principle. Can you locate an approximation of the quality you chose in an expert learner on the chart? Which UDL quality might you focus on during this school year? Next, we'll explore the principles of engagement, representation, and action expression a bit deeper. The UDL guidelines are used as a tool to support teachers when designing lessons as a means of providing ways to remove barriers in curriculum design and reach more learners. The endless options and UDL curriculum design framework is applicable to all types of instructional models: online learning, traditional classroom instruction, a hybrid model, special education, co-teaching, etc. In this section, remember the brain is complex and all 3 areas of the brain need to be activated in order for optimal learning to occur. So, we are not approaching these guidelines as a checklist or siloed instructional strategies, but instead as an integrated process leading to student success. We'll begin with the principle of engagement. The principle of engagement is based on the affective network in the brain, the limbic system, the area of the brain responsible for emotions and memory. This is also the area of brain that tells you to fight or flight. There is no language in this area of the brain, but it is what determines how learners get engaged, feel connected, stay motivated, how they experience challenges, excitement, and interest. Students will approach school with varying social, emotional, and behavioral skills, so they need to be explicitly taught what to do when the emotions take over the cognition. To activate this area of the brain, we need to promote the way students are engaged to develop students that are purposeful and motivated learners. Remember the variability of learners discussed previously, as well as the process by which expert learners are developed. Let's transition to the principle of representation. The principle of representation is based on the recognition network of the brain. Think input or receptive language in the various ways in which students process information. The temporal lobe is the area of the brain that is activated when you hear, see, and smell stimuli. This is how we gather information, make sense of it, put it in categories, and store it into working short-term and long-term memory. To activate this area of the brain, we need to provide multiple ways for students to receive information for the purpose of developing students that are resourceful and knowledgeable. Lastly, let's explore the principle of action and expression. The strategic network is found in the frontal lobe. This is the area of the brain responsible for planning and performing tasks. This is also the area of the brain responsible for problem solving and completing higher order cognitive tasks. To activate this area of the brain, we need to provide students with options for demonstrating what they know so we can develop strategic and goal-directed learners. The final section of this session focuses on the UDL blueprint for creating accessible lesson plans and equity in the delivery of instruction. UDL provides a blueprint for creating instructional barrier-free goals, also referred to as lesson objectives, valid and reliable assessments that are construct relevant, effective teaching methods and materials that assist with deepening understanding of abstract concepts using flexible approaches that could be customized and adjusted for individual needs. The process begins by identifying learner variability. From there, and throughout each step of the process, the focus is placed on mitigating potential barriers in the development of learning goals, assessments, instructional methods, and materials. The first step is to develop learning goals that are standards aligned. Separate the means from the end and include verbs that foster multiple means of action and expression. By removing potential barriers within the lesson objectives, we can create valid and reliable assessments that are directly connected to what we are teaching and expecting students to learn. From there, we use the UDL guidelines to create barrier-free methods and materials to deliver instruction that is concretely tied to the learning goals and assessments resulting in the development of expert learners. On your processing guide, there are 4 sections to reflect on the key vocabulary connected to the lesson design process. Also in your processing guide, there is a key question to consider. Why is this planning process so important? Thank you so much for your time and attention. And in conclusion, we're all on a journey to continuously improve and do better. In the words of Maya Angelou, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. On your processing guide, answer this last question. What are 2 areas based on the information presented that you can commit to doing better? For questions or more information, please visit sipinclusion.org or follow us on Twitter or Facebook at sipinclusion. You can also reach out to me directly at jmercado@edcoe.org. Thank you so much and have a great day.